Good morning. Today we are talking about espresso. Be sure to stick around because there are some common mistakes that you want to avoid when pulling shots, but we're going to be talking about what espresso is not, and the steps that you need to take to pull your first shots of espresso. So, let's get brewing. Hello, my name is Stephen Holm and I'm with Homegrounds, a place for you to go and learn more about brewing and enjoying better quality coffee right at home. Today we're talking about espresso, and in order to get started, we should probably define what espresso is, which can be a little bit difficult. Not just because everyone's preferences are different and we all like different types of espresso, but a lot of it is also based on culture and history surrounding this beverage. So I will just be using the definition that I personally learned when I was taking classes through the Specialty Coffee Association. And that definition is: espresso is a 25 to 35 milliliter beverage prepared from 7 to 9 grams, 14 to 18 grams for a double, of coffee through which clean water of 195 to 205 degrees Fahrenheit or 90.5 to 96.1 degrees Celsius has been forced at 9 to 10 atmospheres of pressure, and where the grind of the coffee is such that the brew time is 20 to 30 seconds. While brewing, the flow of espresso will appear to have the viscosity of warm honey, and the resulting beverage will exhibit a thick, dark, golden crema. Espresso should be prepared specifically for and immediately served to its intended customer. Quite the mouthful. But it's important to understand that this definition is constantly changing. People are changing variables and finding good results in other methods. But I believe it's a good reference point of where to start when talking about espresso. Espresso is a method of preparing and extracting coffee. And it's also the term used to describe the actual beverage or the liquid that you have as your end result. Now, I think it's maybe a little more important to define what espresso is not. And first, espresso is not expresso. It's an S, not an X. But more importantly, and a very common misconception, is espresso is not a type of coffee. You can actually use any coffee out there as espresso. But the reason that we see coffees and blends specifically designed for espresso is that espresso is such a finicky beverage that darker roasted coffees will typically be a little bit more forgiving and easier to extract in an espresso machine. It is also a taste that we are accustomed to, and they also shine through a little bit better once you add milk and have a cappuccino or a latte. So that isn't to say that a super light roasted coffee can't be used for espresso. It definitely can. It may just be a little bit more difficult to dial in, and you may just not like the taste, and that's fine. Now, really quick, I just want to say that this video is meant to show you the basics of espresso. We could have an entire video talking about tamping and the effects of tamping, and we could have another video on your dose and how different dose amounts will affect your espresso. That's not what this video is. We will have more in-depth videos in the future. The goal of this video is for you to understand what espresso is and how to prepare it. So first step is to prepare your dose. Your dose is the amount of coffee that you're going to be using for your espresso, and your dose will vary based on the basket size that you have that came with your machine. Now, this basket in particular is rated for 18 grams, so I am only brewing 18 gram doses with this machine currently. I highly recommend just starting with one dose when you're first starting off with espresso and experimenting with variables like grind size and your end yield before even playing around with your dose. So I'm going to go ahead and grind 18 grams of coffee into this basket. Perfect, 18 grams. So now that you have your coffee in your basket, you can see that it's in these mounds and it's all clumpy. And so we want to take those grounds and level them off before we tamp. Now, this is one of those things that there's a lot of varying information out there on best methods to level out your dose. We're going to start by just taking our finger and gently moving it over the top, being careful not to spill too many grounds to make an even surface right there. And then we are going to tamp. I'm going to stand up for this because it's a little easier to show. So when you tamp, you're just going to take your tamper and hold it kind of like a doorknob. Put your arm at a 90-degree angle and set it flush on top of your coffee grounds. Now, traditionally it said that you want to apply 30 pounds of pressure onto the coffee. I'd recommend just pressing down until you feel it pushing back at you, and that's good. It's more important to be consistent with yourself as you keep pulling shots than trying to reach this 30 pounds of pressure. I don't recommend twisting this at all. You can give it a quick little polish if you want, but don't press down and twist, or else you may just totally ruin your puck that's inside of there. So we have our coffee tamped. And now before you insert this into the group head, make sure that you have no coffee on the sides here. You just want to make sure everything's nice and clean and you're not getting too much coffee up in there. So now we have a nice flat bed of coffee grounds and we're ready to get brewing. First, I am going to take my cup and purge the group head. That's going to preheat my cup and rinse out any little coffee grounds that may have still been on the screen, even though you should be wiping it off after every shot. Now we want to make sure that we have everything in place before we actually pull our shot. So I am going to get my scale back out because I'm going to weigh my espresso so I know when to stop it. And I'm also going to have a timer so that I have a reference point of how long it went and I know how to adjust my settings in the future. I'm going to dump this rinse water right here, set my cup on my scale and tear it out, and now I'm all set. It's important to have everything ready to go because as soon as you insert this into the group head, you pretty much want to start brewing as soon as possible because there's a lot of heat up in there and you don't want these coffee grounds just sitting in the heat underneath that screen for too long before you get brewing. So, I'm going to insert this here. Put this under here. And go. See, the espresso is flowing really nice. I will talk in a second about when I am stopping this. Alright, so that went pretty well. As far as how much espresso I pulled, I am starting with a 1-to-2 ratio. So I started with 18 grams of coffee in, so I was aiming for 36 grams out. I stopped my shot just short of hitting 36 grams on here because as you could see, when I pressed to stop, it still had a few drips come out at the end. I would recommend starting with a 1-to-2 ratio, seeing if that suits you to your preferences and adjusting from there. So those are the basics of espresso. Hopefully by now you understand what espresso actually is and what it is not, and the basic steps to pull your first shot. Now we will be making more advanced videos in the future, taking a look at steaming milk and pouring latte art, and experimenting with all of these different variables and how to dial in your espresso. But for now, hopefully this video was helpful. If you enjoyed it, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel if you're new around here. And until next time, happy brewing.